When a world-famous performance artist grew ill and expired in the 80s, rumors began to circulate that he had faked his death to live a life of solitude. While there was little to back up these claims for the longest time, that all changed when his own brother came on stage with a surprising revelation and an even more surprising guest. The subject of today's video is really a cultural icon that needs no introduction for most people out there. But just for context, and for those who haven't heard about him, let's get into the early life of Andy Kaufman. Andy Kaufman, known later in life as a great American entertainer, was born in 1949 in New York City, the oldest of 3 siblings. He was born into a middle-class Jewish family in Long Island to a mother who was a fashion model and a father who was a jewelry salesman. Andy grew up as a fairly normal kid during the beginning. He had a grandpa that he really loved who he called Papu. It was Papu that would sing songs with him and carry on like a performer. However, it was when Papu died that things got dark. Instead of telling Andy the honest truth, his family told him that Papu had moved away to a far-off country and was never coming back. So instead of learning to face a harsh reality, Andy was instead left feeling abandoned. This was a feeling that would never quite leave him. For a while, he really withdrew from the world, locking himself in his room. It took a while to come out of his shell, and when he did, the song and dance routine from before was what would breathe life back into him. Andy took to the role of entertainer early on in life, performing at his friends' birthday parties, playing records and cartoons for them. He also wrote poetry and stories during his childhood, writing an entire novel that went unpublished at age 16. After graduating from high school in 1967, he enrolled in college where he came to study TV production. There he started his own show on the school network called Uncle Andy's Funhouse. 2 years later, Andy would hitchhike out to Las Vegas to meet Elvis Presley, showing up unannounced at his hotel. This seemed to boost his motivation as he soon started performing at coffee shops and writing his first one-man show. Things got a little rough once again when Andy ended up having a child out of wedlock with his old high school girlfriend. Unable to take care of the daughter, the two decided to give her up for adoption in 1969. This was something that would go on to haunt both Andy and his family for quite some time, feeling as if his daughter had just vanished. Feeling as if he himself were abandoned as a child, it's likely he felt that he had now done the same thing to his very own kid. Later that year, Andy decided to learn transcendental meditation at college. For the rest of his life, Andy would meditate and perform yoga for a whole 3 hours every single day. Later on, he would even travel to Spain to teach these techniques himself. He said that he utilized these techniques he learned to build up confidence and take his act to comedy clubs. After graduating, he took to performing stand-up at various clubs all throughout the East Coast, and this was how things would remain for the next few years. After building up a name for himself, he was invited to appear on Saturday Night Live in 1975 to perform some parts of his act on stage. One of the characters he would be best known for was his foreign man persona, which always went over well with audiences. While getting more and more famous, he continued to hit up comedy clubs and theaters all over the country. Andy soon came up with a character called Tony Clifton, a character he treated as if he were a person all on his own. Tony was an obnoxious lounge singer who would often abuse the audience and get laughs for being a bit of a scumbag. Tony would open for Andy at comedy clubs and even perform some of his own shows. While Andy would usually play Tony, sometimes it was actually either his brother Michael or his best friend Bob Smuda who took the role. Andy got so serious with the Tony character that when it came time to act on a show called Taxi, one of Andy's only conditions was that Tony Clifton would be able to act on the show as a guest star as well. However, after he made a huge scene on set, Tony was fired from the show and thrown out by security. Just as Andy hoped, this was highly publicized and appeared in the local news. Andy began to often guest star on various comedy and late-night shows, especially with David Letterman. He began to incorporate more fourth-wall breaking pranks into his shows, such as having an altercation with a professional wrestler on the late-night set, something that people didn't even know was planned for over 10 years. In another incident, he got into an argument and even a bit of a physical fight with a few of the other actors on Saturday Night Live, something that only those involved in the fight knew to be planned. Andy kind of grew to like deceiving the audience as a joke, and he did it often. Even when it came to seemingly mundane topics, like questions about his personal life, he would like to troll the audience by giving answers that were just flat out not true. For example, when he was asked if he had any kids, he said that he had adopted 3 sons, which was simply just a lie. Before the days of the internet, people couldn't really look these things up to see if they were true and just kind of took it at face value. Down the road, this would create a lot of confusion as to how many kids Andy actually had and would leave a lot of people confused about his family life. Behind the scenes, Andy still had no children aside from the daughter he had given up for adoption years back. He wasn't married, but he was in a close relationship with a woman named Lynn Margulies, who he met while filming in 1982. The two soon grew very close, with Lynn usually being at his side. While everything seemed to be going well for Andy, he soon developed a persistent cough. This cough grew more and more out of control until his family began to take notice at Thanksgiving dinner in 1983. This cough hadn't gone away for over a month, but he assured his family that his doctor told him that nothing was wrong. Just to make sure, when he went back home to LA afterwards, he went to the Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in order to get some tests run. In just a few days, he was diagnosed with large cell carcinoma of the lung, a form of lung cancer usually associated with smoking. Throughout his next appearances, Andy would grow more frail, something the audience took notice of. He did say that he had a certain illness that he was hoping to cure with natural medicine, like going on an all-fruit and vegetable diet. In reality, he was undertaking radiation therapy, but it was too late. The cancer had already spread to his brain. His last public appearance was in 1984, where he showed up looking very thin and sporting a mohawk, likely due to losing his hair from the radiation therapy. The next day after that final appearance, Andy decided to try one final option. He flew out to the Philippines to try his shot at a new therapy called psychic surgery. This was pseudoscience at best, and technically a fraudulent practice, but Andy felt that he had nothing left to do but try everything. Likely due to a bit of the placebo effect, he did feel better for a while after returning to the US, but it wouldn't last long. In May of 1984, he was admitted into the Cedars-Sinai Medical Center once again. This time, though, he wouldn't be coming out. He died on May 16, 1984, at only 36 years old. He was surrounded by his family and his girlfriend during his final moments. He had a funeral in Long Island before being buried in the Beth David Cemetery in Elmont, New York. Andy Kaufman had often talked about faking his own death throughout his life. His best friend, Bob Zamuda, felt that his grandfather's supposed disappearance and death gave him somewhat of a fascination with having control over life and death. There were times he discussed with friends how he would pull off such a stunt and how long he would wait before he finally revealed that he was really alive down the road. Knowledge of these conversations began to spread around to people he knew and eventually leaked out to the wider public. A lot of Andy's friends believed wholeheartedly that he really had faked the whole thing, especially those who hadn't been around in the days leading up to his death. How sure they seemed, they were able to convince a lot of other people that this must be true as well. This belief led to a large underground rumor that continued to spread all throughout the 80s and 90s and even up to today. In fact, about 5 years prior, Andy and his friend and writing partner Bob Zamuda were writing the script for a movie they would call The Tony Clifton Story, a documentary-style movie about the character's life. At the end of the movie, it was to say, on June 12, 1980, Tony Clifton, at the age of 45, died of cancer at Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Hollywood, California. Oddly enough, this was the same hospital and same cause of death that Andy would go on to have himself. These rumors were only fueled by the appearances of Tony Clifton continuing at various comedy clubs after his death. During the early 1990s, Tony would often appear in particular throughout nightclubs in Los Angeles. Jim Carrey himself, who had actually played Andy in a movie at one point, said that Bob was the one who had been playing as Tony throughout that time, something he had already done many times while Andy was still alive. It was in 1992 that Andy's daughter, Maria, finally learned who she was, discovering that she was actually Andy's daughter when she began to retrace her roots. It wasn't long before she was able to track down her mom, her grandpa, Andy's father, and her aunt. Maria's daughter, Andy's biological granddaughter, would even go on to act as Andy's sister in Man on the Moon with Jim Carrey, a movie about his life. Rumors of Andy still being alive spread far and wide, a rumor that persisted for decades. In 2008, Andy's brother Michael, who had acted with Andy over the years and was there at his deathbed, was interviewed for a documentary by Christopher Maloney called The Death of Andy Kaufman. He spoke of hearing about Andy's cancer diagnosis and, slowly over time, being convinced that he was going to die. He spoke of being present at his death, attending his funeral, and seeing the headstone. He felt that Andy could have possibly used his very skilled meditation techniques in order to slow down his heartbeat, making others believe he was dead. However, while acknowledging that this was technically possible, he said that he did not believe that Andy was alive, ending by saying that the rumors were not true. However, Michael would appear to have changed his mind in 2013. This was when he took to the stage in a New York comedy club to inform the audience that he had received a letter from his brother who he thought was dead. He told the audience that he had first come to believe that Andy may still be alive when he came across some of his writings many years back, finding references to him faking his death, including a line that said, "I will reappear." Not too long, he was exiting a restaurant on Christmas Eve in 1999 when a random parking attendant would hand him a letter. This letter was said to have been from none other than his brother. Keep in mind, he did the interview in 2008 in which he said that his brother was dead. Despite this, Michael read this letter to the crowd, saying, "It was too much pressure to be Andy Kaufman. I just wanted to be Andy. I think that's why I got sick. I had to change completely and quickly. I'm extremely, very happily married with the most wonderful wife in the whole wide world and with the two greatest kids, a 10-year-old daughter and a son who is 8. As if this wasn't enough to shock the audience, that wasn't all they were going to hear. A woman had come to the comedy club with him. A woman that Michael would introduce as none other than Andy's daughter, the daughter that he had fathered in the time since he was believed to have been dead. He said that he fully believed this woman to be Andy's daughter, stating his reasoning. "She told me a lot of secrets that Andy and I had together, like our secret handshake, the way Andy made fun of me for being too nice of a guy." This woman came on stage, telling the audience that Andy had dropped out of show business all those years ago to live out the rest of his life as a stay-at-home dad. The two didn't give any details as to how Andy had actually succeeded in faking his death back then at the hospital. It wasn't too long before the Smoking Gun website came to show the true identity of the supposed daughter. They were able to find out that she was actually a woman named Alexandra Tatarsky, and her father was not Andy, but instead a 58-year-old psychologist. The Smoking Gun reported that Michael had met her at a gallery in Manhattan earlier that year and asked her to act out a little skit as his brother's long-lost daughter. After this article came out, Michael wouldn't cling to the story for too long. He would surprise the public once again only a few days later, appearing on CNN to say that he feels he was the victim of a hoax, saying, "Now that it's Thursday, not Monday anymore, I believe I am part of a hoax." He said that he didn't hire Alexandra at all. He felt that someone else had hired her to play his niece in order to fool him. Not blaming Alexandra, he stated, "I don't believe she's acting on her own, though. But that's all I know." The host pressed him for a clear answer, asking, "You think that this is a hoax and you were a victim of the hoax?" To which Michael responded with, "Correct," while still maintaining that he was not a part of the hoax but a victim himself. He was asked about the Smoking Gun article, which stated that he had hired Alexandra, to which he responded with, "That is not true." Given that Alexandra herself couldn't be reached, this was all they had to go on at the time. Michael was further asked if he was angry about the whole thing. He said, "I am still processing it. As Andy's brother, you learn over the years, to go with the flow, kind of. So I have mixed emotions. I never allowed myself to get too excited, but I was always slightly skeptical." After this whole incident, the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office did something surprising, something not usually done in any case. They re-released Andy's death certificate to the public and posted it online. However, the rumors of Andy being alive didn't end there by a long shot. In fact, only 1 year later, none other than Bob Zmuda would go on to write a book about the whole thing called Andy Kaufman, The Truth. It was in this book that Bob said that Andy's death was indeed no more than a prank and that he would soon reveal himself once again. He said that Andy had told them the upper limit on the prank would be 30 years and that 30 years was already up. This is how Bob tells the story. He detailed how Andy had been discussing faking his death more and more in the years leading up to his supposed death. He feels that with Andy's grandfather's death in his childhood, he came to believe that life and death could be manipulated. He added, "It was here where I believe Andy would develop the concept of bending reality to suit his needs. If his parents could fake his grandfather's not dying, Andy would just fake himself dying." He noted another conversation that the two had in the past when Andy started to cough. Bob recalls telling him to "stop with the coughing already, I think it's a dead giveaway," to which Andy reportedly replied with, "I don't know, everyone seems to believe it, maybe I'll just stick with cancer." Bob then asked him how long he planned to continue this charade, being told, "If I was going to be a little boy about it, I'd go into hiding for 1 or 2 years. But if I was going to be a man about it, it'd be 20 or 30 years. When it comes to how Andy actually managed such a feat with his friends and family all around, Bob believes that he found a body double with a near-identical appearance who was already dying of cancer. Then Andy continued to change his appearance to match this man, such as gradually losing weight and shaving his hair. Then, when the double was dying, Andy made the big switch, having the double buried as Andy while he moved far away to start anew. Bob even claimed that other celebrities felt this to be the case as well, saying that Dave Chappelle's seemingly random exit from The Chappelle Show was directly inspired by what Andy had done. Bob felt that, given the 30-year time limit on the prank, Andy must be coming back any time now. After all, the time limit had already been passed. At the end of the book, he appears to address Andy directly, urging him to reach out so that they can plan how his great return would go down, with Bob even willing to coordinate a massive event in his honor. When it comes to why he isn't hiding the prank as Andy's best friend, he says, "The only reason I'm giving it up now is that Andy set a time limit on this one, 30 years. So I've kept my part of the bargain and kept my mouth shut, but no more. The prank's over. I want him back, and he's coming back." As to whether or not Bob actually believes that Andy is alive, or if this is yet just another reality-bending prank, nobody can be sure. Given that the book came out in 2014, 1 year after the incident with Michael and Alexandra, it does raise suspicions. Could it have been that Bob actually hired a parking attendant to give Michael the letter and hired Alexandra to pose as a daughter as some sort of publicity stunt? After all, it was knowing family secrets that convinced Michael that Alexandra was real, supposedly. As Andy's best friend of decades, Bob would have known those things. Later on, Alexandra did speak directly about her performance as Andy's daughter, saying, "I've tried not to let my 2 days of internet fame affect my work all that much. Live performance always feels risky to me. There are live humans in the room, who knows what they'll do. They could laugh, cry, stab you in the face, walk right out, or worst of all, do nothing at all. Although, fudge, now that you're asking me, I am reflecting upon those winter months following the confession and the craziness. I found myself plagued by rather big and unwieldy questions like, who am I? So I decided to spend every day figuring it all out, but I didn't get very far. And from that despair came this wretched and hilarious show." With this comment, she was speaking of a performance in which she interviews people about their experiences with grief. Kaufman's manager at the time of his death, George Shapiro, was there with him at the hospital when he died. He has said, "Andy's very much alive in our hearts, but I don't think his body is around. He died. I was in the hospital." Michael at one point said the same thing. "I saw him emaciated. I saw him die." Andy's girlfriend Lynn has reiterated very much of the same. Andy's father Stanley has long since passed. However, when he was still alive, he said that he was used to his son playing elaborate pranks, but he had no doubt that his son's death was real. He said, "Andy scared the hell out of us. In retrospect, of course, I'm so very proud of him, but at the same time, it was scary. I used to be embarrassed by my son. But he knew everything that he did, everything was deliberate, everything was calculated. He did a good job with what he intended to do. I am proud of the kid." Stanley had always wondered what had come of Andy's real daughter and was delighted to have eventually gotten to meet her. Stanley himself came to suffer a fate from cancer much like his sons, and during that time, he and Maria became very close. He said, "She's the greatest gift my son ever gave me." Rumors of Andy having lived through his supposed death still spread to this day. Many online accounts are dedicated to proving that the prank was indeed real, giving their various evidence in the process. They feel that he might have gone to Aruba, which is where he would tell Lynn that he would go after the performance. Whether or not this is true is nearly impossible to prove, as technically he could have faked his death. Anything is possible. Whether or not you feel it's likely is up to you. Once again, thank you for watching my video. If you found it interesting, please give it a like, it really helps me out in the algorithm, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. In celebration of 500k and by popular demand, I have a merch store up now too as well. I only have a few designs up there right now, but I'm hoping to add more pretty soon. I've just recently started up a podcast with 4 of my friends called the NBR Podcast. If you like this show, I think you'll like that one too. If you want, go ahead and follow me on social media. If anything were to ever happen to this channel, that would be the only way you'd ever hear about it. I also really appreciate it when people follow me on Patreon. There you can get videos early, ad-free, and uncensored. Channel memberships are back up too, and you can get all the same benefits there as well. Once again, this has been your host Kyle. Thank you, and good night.